Good evening, Wakefield, and welcome to the latest update of the Envision project. We are focused tonight on the corridor of Main Street or Albion Street between Main and North Avenue. We are joined this evening by Bill Renaud, who is our town engineer, as well as Joe Conway, who is our DPW director. And we also are joined by VHB as well. We have several members of VHB who will be discussing this exciting opportunity for us. We are in a position now to be able to talk about where we left off at our last public forum, and that was the focus on Albion Street specifically. You may recall we had a complete streets grant of just under $400,000 that has enabled us to use this corridor as a template for what we expect to be the Envision project across the greater part of the downtown. This is an integrated piece to that. We are able to begin the work on this project in short order, and with many thanks to Bill Renaud and the entire DPW for really coming together to come up with some really creative and thoughtful planning, and certainly VHB's hand in this as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Renaud and do some introductions as well, Bill, as we go around with the group that's assembled tonight.
I appreciate it, Ed. I think we're going to kick it over to Jeffrey to start up the presentation, and then we'll be here for questions towards the end. So that's kind of how we're going to do the forum today.
Perfect. Jeffrey, we'll hand it off to you next. Jeffrey from VHB has joined us this evening by Trish and Josh as well.
Excellent. Well, thanks for the introduction, Ed and Bill. We're very excited to be here with the community again this evening and looking forward to a great conversation. As Ed had mentioned, we're really focusing on Albion streets tonight in terms of some of the aesthetics and some of the streetscape that we've been working on over the last couple of months, and been working very closely with Bill and his team in terms of the design of the road and the engineering that he's been doing to getting ready for this evening as well. So we have about maybe a 15 to 20 minute presentation. Again, we're going to be focusing on Albion Street. And I think the whole point of this evening is to get the community up to speed on some of the different elements that we're planning for the streetscape along Albion Street. And for those of you that have been involved in the Envision Wakefield process over the last year or two, we're really excited to be working with the town in terms of getting to the point where you can start to think about what this place will look and what it will feel like. So tonight is very much about getting community's feedback about some of the details, some of the materials, and some of those choices. So we're looking forward to that part of the conversation. So to get there, we thought it was pretty important to go through a series of slides here that will present some of the basic information that we have for you tonight, with the idea that we'll arm you with all the information that we've got. We'll come back and have a pretty robust conversation at the back end of this as well. So where are we talking about? So on the map here, north is on the upper part of the sheet here, south is to the bottom. We're really talking about the eastern part of Albion Street when it goes from North Ave over to Main Street on the right-hand side here. The part that's further west on Albion Street, while that was part of the study from when we talked about this a year or so ago, tonight is really about focusing on the part that's east of the tracks and east of North Avenue in terms of where the town has advanced the vision for this area as well. So where were we when we were talking about this about a year or so ago? We had really identified a series of streetscape elements that could go into the design of Albion Street as well as Main Street as well. So what were the things that we were talking about? We're really looking at understanding how Albion Street could really be modified slightly. And I'm just going to ask folks when they join the meeting if they can go on to mute. That would be great. That when it gets modified slightly by keeping it the same type of travel going down Albion Street towards the tracks, maybe adding a few features that can really enhance that streetscape in terms of bump outs and places for people who are walking down that street to have a really nice environment. So from having plants, lighting elements, perhaps some bike racks, maybe some benches and informal seating, for example, putting in trash receptacles in terms of the events and the programming that happens there as well. Maybe putting in some trees in certain locations, whether they be in the ground or maybe in planters, for example. All of those key streetscape elements, I think, are important towards the further advancement of Albion Street itself. And we had a great conversation talking about that about a year ago. So what's been happening since that time frame? Bill and his team has really done a lot of hard work, frankly, in terms of putting together a series of drawings These are just a couple of representative drawings here that from an engineering perspective have actually designed all of the little bits and pieces all the way along Albion Street. And you can imagine for a project like this, a lot of the drawings and the details are really critical to understand the height, the width, all the details, the curbing, the materials, and the constructability about what's going to go into Albion Street as well. So while Bill has been able to advance a lot of that, we're really at the point that we want to engage the community to figure out what is the final touch on that. What are the materials that could be placed within that design? And I think you'll find tonight that there's actually a fair amount of flexibility in terms of what those material choices are within the streetscape. So while we're going to be talking about different elements of Albion Street, I think it's important to recognize that from the vehicular perspective, the cross section about parking on the street and the one-way point of travel, much of that is just really going to be rebuilt, but not really changing dramatically. We're going to focus this evening on the areas that are going to afford a fair amount of change in terms of these bump outs and extra space for pedestrians to both cross the road as well as have some spots to be able to rest and partake in some of those things that I just mentioned before. So we'll be looking closely at these 4 areas. These are the areas where some extended sidewalks have happened, where some bump outs have happened, and where some crosswalks are planned along the street as well. In particular of these areas, we're going to spend a little bit of time looking in the mid-block area of Albion Street and show you some illustrations that really indicate the variability that could happen in the final steps of the design plan as well. So we're going to zoom into this one location here, location number 3 of the 4, and show you some of these illustrations. And keep in mind that we're not showing the buildings that are out there today. We're really just focusing on the streetscape there. So we just want to really focus the attention about what's happening in the street versus the context up against the edges. So where do we get started here? So we have several options that we wanted to show you in some of these frankly typical locations. So when we have parking on both sides of the street, we have one travel lane where the vehicles would go up and down the road here. Again, that one direction towards the train station. There's certain locations because of the driveways that are out there and the striping of the parking that is out there today that will afford us the ability to put in what we call these bump outs. So these bump outs are typically about 6 or 7 feet wide. They're basically about 15 to 20, sometimes 30 feet long in their orientation. And what that affords the ability to do is neck down the width of the road, have more space for pedestrians, and put in those features that I talked about before. So of the options that Bill and the town is looking at, we've got 3 pretty important starting points for the conversation. One is where we imagine that we're using these bump outs to be able to put in things like porous pavers. And what that basically means is if you can imagine bricks that are laid in the sidewalk area that lets water infiltrate between those and gets caught into what's called a catch basin along the edge of this here. And I'll point this out on the screen. Here's the catch basin. Here's some of the porous pavers that would happen in here. It really gives the ability to have a little bit of what's called a performance measure for this area in terms of capturing the water, treating the water, and thinking about the drainage in this area. So it looked very much like a brick sidewalk. There'd be ways of capturing the water. Perhaps there's an area where you can plan for bicyclists, where they might be able to come in, rest up their bike, lock that up, so forth. There might be a way to put in some granite blocks in this area that might afford the ability for people to have a rest and sit in this area as well. So this is very much geared around porous pavers, pretty simple approach to it, brick approach, places for bicyclists to put in place, and a couple spots for people to have a sit and a rest along the length of Albion Street. A different way at looking at this is taking some of those same elements within these 2 bump outs and really thinking about other ingredients that could happen here. So in this location, same exact spot, we've contemplated the idea of what if it's less about the bicyclists in this area? Perhaps they park their bikes somewhere else. And maybe it affords the opportunity to put in a couple of street trees in this area with tree grates in the ground plane, capturing some of that water in a slightly different way, but perhaps it's a different way of using this space as well. A third way that we've looked at this is perhaps that this should be dedicated a little bit more towards planting down towards the ground plane. And in the details that would be happening here, basically these different planted areas would capture water into the system and then work as almost a mini rain garden in a bioretention area before it goes into the ground as well. And obviously offering the opportunity for this to have a lot more planting and more of an aesthetic look to it as well. So while we're showing these three options, you can clearly see that there's different ways of thinking about Albion Street in terms of how it functions and how it looks in terms of your preferences. And all of these options are literally on the table to get your feedback tonight. So what happens if you don't happen to like brick, for example? I think there's other ways that you can look at the same area and think about different colors of the brick. Perhaps they're gray colored brick, maybe a slightly modern feel into how that comes across. But the idea of the materials that we're showing in any of the illustrations tonight, there's a fair amount of options about how those can change and plug and play. So while we showed you these, think about those 4 or 5 different locations along Albion Street and how this as a kit of parts and a palette of materials really could be applied in very different ways. So also what happens if you like maybe perhaps some of these trees that are shown here, maybe there's some planter boxes that are out here rather than just the trees, and maybe we start to introduce a couple of benches that are out here as well. And again, those details can vary as we're showing. And also maybe there's a slightly modern contemporary version of this too, where if you happen to like some of those granite type of benches out there, maybe some of those planters for some of the lower growing plants might have the ability to seed around those as well. So again, a lot of options that we want to talk to you tonight about what you'd like to see happen here. In the end of the day, this is really about helping us define what we call like a design style or a set of options so that Bill and the team can really take that set of design aesthetics and apply that from the materiality along the length of Albion Street. So whether you like the traditional, perhaps something a little bit more contemporary, I think it's important to realize that this is the opportunity for Wakefield to think about the design aesthetics and really start to bring these streets together in terms of how they look and feel and the character of them as well. So I think the whole point here would be, once we get through the end of the conversation tonight, that we'd have enough direction for Bill and the team to start thinking about picking out some of those materials so that really there's a continuity in certain the styles and the aesthetics. And also looking for the ability to put in some artwork along the way here as well. So I guess the big question, as I mentioned, is really what do you want the street to function and look like? So there's a lot of different variability that we already went through tonight. So the more you can tell us about the functionality as well as the look, that would be great for this evening. So we're also going to spend a little bit of time towards the back end of the conversation tonight looking really quickly at Main Street. So you can imagine Albion Street as one project. Main Street is the next part of the phase of the downtown work that's going to happen. That takes a little bit more time to get through all of those same details that Bill and his team has done, for example. But we're going to give you a little bit of a sneak peek at some of the things that we're thinking about for Main Street. And let me just go back to one slide to show you folks some things. If you look over on the right-hand side of the screen, you will see Main Street as it's perpendicular to Albion. And if you recall from many of the community conversations that we've had over this last year to year and a half, I think what you'll find is that there's a lot of opportunity going up and down Main Street from the school all the way up past the Rockery into the lake, that there's these areas for modifications along the edges. So while we've shown you a couple on Albion Street, there's probably 3 to 4 or 5 times those amount of opportunities along Main Street. So as we get further into the design of Main Street over the next 6 to 9 months, I think it'll be important to continue the conversation. So again, tonight we're showing a little bit of the sneak peek. So imagine this is one of those locations. It could be 4 or 5 of these locations that will look very similar to this. But we really wanted to show you that there's a lot of flexibility and a lot of conversation, frankly, to be had about what to do with those newfound spaces along Main Street. So here we're going to show you about 5 or 6 different options. What's not shown here behind all of these people walking down the sidewalk is some of the buildings along Main Street, because for this conversation, that's less important. But we're looking at the parking along Main Street. We're looking at some crosswalks along Main Street and what one of these bump outs might look like, or curb extensions might look like at some of these intersections. So here we're showing you this idea of what would happen if some of these curb extensions are really about mobility. And what do we mean by that? We mean where bicyclists might be able to go along the darker color part of the road here, where if pedestrians are coming in and crossing through some of these bump outs, to be able to cross these streets and really use it to enhance the mobility and the safety from a pedestrian perspective. And we realize by looking at some of the sizes of these types of curb extensions that there's enough room in there to be able to have some really nice aesthetics, frankly, as well, from planter beds to trash receptacles, granite curbing, and so forth. All of those elements will really bring these corners of these intersections to life. what else might that look like? So where we do not have crosswalks in two different directions, and where there's not the need to have people crossing across Main Street, because frankly, that only happens in certain locations, perhaps these types of curb extensions become bigger, more planting, and you can see behind those planting, we might have a couple of benches where people are sitting along the length of Main Street, looking towards the buildings, having some conversations with your colleagues and residents and business owners in a very nice environment there as well. We've also thought, well, what happens where we want to actually not program some of these corners with a lot of planting, but maybe it's perhaps a spot for people to gather. So if you want to have areas of certain corners of these intersections where people can congregate a little bit, sit on a couple of benches, maybe have some light ballers up there to light this up at the early evening and into the evening for some safety reasons, maybe there should be some flexibility about letting people habitate this area and really be able to get into it as well. Also, we thought about stormwater, just like we showed you along Albion Street. There's maybe the potential along these edges of these bump outs and these curb extensions, as we're showing in the gray area here, that some of this can maybe collect water, let it come into, or really get water to all these plants in a very organic and very sustainable way, and infiltrate the area in this area to let these plants survive and thrive. So maybe there's a whole idea around stormwater and functioning in this location as well. Another option we've thought about is maybe there's some spots along Main Street that really should be dedicated towards bicyclists. The idea that you have a spot where you can go and you can park your bike and be able to walk throughout the entire downtown and be connected to the lake, down to the school and to the trail. That would be kind of an exciting new set of opportunities that are really not out there today as well. Only a few more here and then we'll move on. The other idea that maybe there's an area for some information. So in terms of a community kiosk or information that you might be able to gather about the downtown. And if you think about people who are wanting to go to events and celebrations and concerts back when we're going to post-COVID, when all these things are back and available to everybody, this idea of having an information hotspot might be a way of treating these spaces as well. And also the idea of what would happen if some of these corners were intentionally very flexible, so that if you want to have a pop-up event, like if you can imagine many of the wonderful events that you have on the Common and down by the lake, if some of that activity worked its way up past the Rockery down to Main Street, how would you use these spaces in terms of maybe pop-up events that people might come and go and be used for further activating the downtown? So we just want to show you a little bit of a glimpse into those areas as well along Main Street. I think the point here again is a lot of opportunity for different types of streetscape, a lot of opportunity for materiality, and we're looking forward to that part of the conversation as well. So again, what does it mean that we're looking for tonight? I think the whole idea is, what would you like to see happen for some of these paving materials? You know, is it brick? Is it concrete? How are we dealing with the materials in terms of some of the crosswalks as well? What are the materials that are really going to bring it to life? We wanted to show you a couple of examples from other communities where if you just simply look at the streetscape colors and palettes and materials, it really sets the character for the entire downtown. And then the importance of thinking about furniture, street trees, signage, and seating areas. All of those things are really important. I think what's exciting for the entire downtown is that you're going to be doing pretty much the whole entire downtown with some of these new materials over time. It'll be pretty exciting as well. Seating and planters is another important part of it. So while you might think there's only one type of bench that every single community uses, that's not the case. From traditional to modern and everywhere in between, even some of the stuff, this is some of our work in the upper right-hand corner over in Holyoke, where looking over the water, but having some modern granite blocks in there too. In the bottom, in the middle there's some work that we did up in Vermont, where that's some granite blocks surrounding some of these edges. So these seating areas can be done in very different ways as well. When it comes to bikes and scooters and racks and trash receptacles, just know that there's many options out there in terms of vendors that build these certain types of products, but all of them have a very different character, look, and feel. And while there might be some that are very playful, like the ABC here, there are also some others that talk about branding and identity. In the bottom left-hand corner, you can see how Providence has actually used the opportunity to brand their downtown or their neighborhoods. So is there a way that you can build upon the branding that has already happened in some of the streetscape elements in downtown Wakefield and think about extending that brand through the wayfinding and the furniture systems that are in place? I think that'll be a very important part of the downtown as well. Lighting is also important, and clearly there's a lot of lights that are out there today, but many communities go through the process of just understanding what is that actual fixture, how does it light the sidewalk in appropriate ways, both in the night and in early evening, not have overcasting of light everywhere and oversaturating neighborhoods. So that's going to be a very important part of the conversation as well. I think, Bill, you might be able to give a little bit of update on where you are at the end of the presentation. So kind of when you put all of those things together, think about this as a palette in terms of how you're going to define the streetscape, from benches to lights to trash receptacles, bikes, bollards I think are very important as well. Even hanging flowers off of your light posts are very important as well. And then what you choose for your low-growing shrubs, your perennials and so forth, and the grasses, the color palette that affords in downtown, and really bringing it to life with some of the flowers and so forth and the plants, I think will be really important to set of decisions. So there's that continuity between downtown. So with that, what we're going to do is we're actually going to shift gears pretty quickly here. We're going to ask that you, in the Zoom platform in a few seconds, find the raise your hand button on your different Zoom platform. And what we're going to do is we're going to invite people to come off mute and join the conversation. And we're going to actually try to get your input on many of the things that we just talked about. Also important to know that we have a chat function that's available this evening. So if you look in your Zoom dashboard, you might be able to find the chat function. At any point in time, you can ask us a question or comment in the chat function, and we have several people that are ready to start to get those questions answered. And then lastly, if you don't feel comfortable joining the conversation or going live, just know that Bill has put his email on here. If you want to follow up with an email to Bill and his team to be able to get your comments heard, that would be another great way. And I think in terms of ground rules, let's just keep it really simple here. I think the more that we can hear from everybody this evening, the better off we'll all be here. So if you can keep your comments kind of short and to the point, that will give us the ability to talk to as many people as possible, would be wonderful. So with that, let's get the conversation started. And I think Ed,
just if I could interject just for a second to remind
please,
Ed. We're talking specifically about Albion Street between Main Street and North Ave for this particular aspect of the project. And so certainly you were giving a sampling of what we're looking at in Main Street and kind of beyond with the Envision project as a whole. This is really looking at the palette of materials for the Albion piece, which is something that is going to be shovel ready, and going out to bid. So just remind everyone that
well, it's funny how things.
With the understanding that we'll have opportunities to talk about what we do here on Albion Street and how that would be expanded to also include the broader project. But for purposes of our shovel readiness, Albion is where we're looking at 4 bump outs within the design. And so to the extent all the participants can be focused on how we can best improve that section of the project, I think that would be the most productive guidance that we can offer to both VHB and our Department of Public Works.
Thank you, Ed. That's a great clarification. So again, mostly focusing on Albion Street. I just want to give you a little bit of a sneak peek about what's happening on Main Street for the future. So thank you very much for that clarification. So what we thought we would do is actually take a look at those 3 options. And again, one was really about the pavers and the bikes. Second one was really about maybe adding in some street trees. Third one was really about having these bioretention areas with some shrubs and some plants. And then talk about those 3 different options to get some direction about some of those preferences. And then what we're going to do is we're going to actually march along the length of Albion Street and pause in those 4 different locations that Ed just mentioned and get some of your preferences, because these locations have slightly different things going on in terms of how it functions today. And maybe some of your preferences might change as we go along the length of Albion Street as well. So with that, I just invite people to raise your hands in Zoom and we can join the conversation. And again, at any point in time, you can actually go ahead and use the chat function as well. So do we have some folks that want to, I think you have to raise your hand virtually during the Zoom meeting versus the good old fashioned way. So if you look at your Zoom box, dialog box, you should be able to find something that looks like a blue hand that you can raise. And what we'll do is we'll start to go to live. So what I'll do is I'll invite you to join the conversation. You'll be able to come off mute. And then if you want to state your name for the record, would be great. And let's join the conversation. So I think I'm going to go to Sarah here. If you'd like to come off of mute here, that would be great.
Hi, my name is Sarah Guerin, and I know many years we talked about having a desirable aspect for Albion Street, particularly that corridor, was to have street trees, and how at the time possible because the sidewalks are too small. So I just stress that for a long time we've wanted street trees. So if it's at all possible to have street trees in the schematics, and it's wonderful to have these bump outs make that possible, that we should go with that in that direction. Because it's very hot. I mean, on any sunny day, the entire length of Albion Street doesn't get shady really on either side. So it would just make it more inviting to interact with the different spots in that street if there were some shade.
Excellent. Great comment, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And when I get done going through these, if people could remember to go back on mute, that would be great. So let's go to Anne. Anne, if you'd like to join the conversation.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Ann Santos. I'm chair of the Wakefield Town Council, but almost lifelong member of Wakefield. I would echo what Sarah said because Albion Street is such a concrete vista. So for me, the more, and obviously if it's sustainable and easy to take care of, but more trees, more greens, making sure the palette, maybe the color of the palette and the choices we make, but I really think some life and color would make it look wonderful. So that's my 2 cents.
Let's go to Matt, if you'd like to join the conversation, Matt.
Hi, my name is Matt Krempen. I would say the same thing as the other two people. I like the idea of trees, and also I got little kids, and I think it'd be really nice with the option 2, a place to sit and stop. So I would vote for option 2 or option 3, slightly more for option 2.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay. Is anyone else who would like to join the conversation? Feel free to raise your hand at any point in time. And let's take a minute to go to some of the people that have put in some of their comments. I'm not sure if Bill or Tris, if you want to dive in here with some of the comments that we've gotten through the chat function. Anything to respond to there?
I'm actually reading through them as we speak.
The first one is the focus on Albion Street being an arts corridor or just for businesses?
Hold enough water to significantly hold back some of the runoff headed to the lake and help us with water quality issues at the lake.
Hold on, Ken, could you just say that again, please? You just
Yes.
broke up. Thank you.
Sorry. With options 2 and 3, with the porousness and bioretention, would those be possibly help us with the water quality issues at the lake? Because where we're dealing with water runoff towards the lake, was that factored in? Would that be helpful? A pro for those 2 models, I guess?
Not necessarily for the lake itself. Unfortunately, the drainage out in this area doesn't drain towards the lake.
Oh, okay.
Small portion does up near for the first bump out that we have at the intersection of Foster and Albion. So that one would, but the other ones further down don't go that route.
Excellent.
As for the question about the corridor being an art corridor or just a business corridor, I think we're looking at both, to be honest with you. We know this is, one of the art districts and cultural districts of the town, and we would definitely look to incorporate, art if possible in some of these bump out locations, as well as with the type of lighting that we use, or as well. So I would say both, to be honest with you.
Excellent.
All right. Ken, I think we just answered your question, and as well as in the chat, so that's covered. Option 1, has the team considered a dedicated bike lane to increase safety? We actually evaluated, but unfortunately that we're constrained with the amount of room that we have to install just a bike lane out there. So it would be more of a sharrow design. So we would include share the sharrow markings within the pavement as part of the project.
Excellent.
Well, the bump outs cut down parking. So obviously that's a big question. So at the moment we're looking at the loss of between 6 to 8 spaces in the roadway itself. But the town is evaluating some public-private partnerships so that we would essentially have a no net loss of parking within the corridor. And we've been discussing with a couple of private entities that have larger parking lots out there. So we're going to continue that discussion as we advance the design. But our goal is to see if we have an ability to maintain the same amount of parking or even increase it potentially.
I think, Bill, it's also important to point out that from a safety perspective too, coming out of a lot of those side driveways and so forth, when a car is parked right up next to the edge there, I think these bump outs actually afford a little bit of the ability to clean some of those issues up as you go along Albion Street as well. So let's take a pause from the chat function and we'll go to a couple folks that have raised their hand as well. So Roseanne, we're going to go to you next if you'd like to unmute and join the conversation.
Hi. Yes, I'd love to join the conversation. So my name's Roseanne Russell, and I own Move to Joy Yoga Studio at 106 Albion Street. I think it's right at actually number 2, so I'm very excited to talk about that one. So I have a lot of experience as to what goes on Albion Street, because I'm there like all the time. It's a very, as everyone said, it's a very hot, I love what Ian said, the concrete, I think concrete jungle, something like that. It's a very hot spot. There's a lot of sun. I love option 3. I think bringing in that bioretention area would be awesome. I think awareness as to the amount of sun and how hot it does get there. So my studio, it can be like right now, it was probably like 85 degrees without anything on. So it's a very hot spot. But I also want to bring awareness to a few things. I don't think we need benches so much in all the areas because of there's just no reason to sit around. Like, I do think you have to consider the businesses and where they are. So like by my location, I just know it well. It's a used car dealership lot. And I don't think it makes sense to have a bench next to cars that are being, you know, started and stopped and a lot of car action. So I just want to bring that awareness to what are the businesses that are happening around there. And then also with the park, well, 2 things. It is actually, my spot is very wet. So when it does rain, it does flood and there is no place for the water to run off. So I think that this is awesome that you're looking at water runoff, but it's a very wet area. And then another thing, the lines that are currently on Albion Street are very big. I think they were made for the really big cars that used to be made. And now we have smaller cars. If you take away the lines or you reline it, you probably, actually during the winter when there's no lines and you can't see the lines, we get a lot more cars in there. So maybe take away the lines and let people park. You probably would get a lot more spots, truthfully. So these are the things I just want to mention.
Excellent, thank you. A lot of great comments. Excellent. Let's go to Chris next. Chris, if you'd like to join the conversation. And Chris, you have to go off mute if you'd like to join the conversation.
Given the budget of $400,000, how much is that actually? Is that a viable number to accomplish all those bump outs and all that work? 1. And 2, I prefer the option 2 and 3. There is some serious runoff in heavy rains on the street. And again, the parking question was answered, so I guess I'm just wondering how viable all that is with $400,000.
Yeah, the project itself, all the bump outs for sure are all being covered, and about 75% of the sidewalk reconstruction for the whole run. We are going to put in a little bit of town funds so we can get the entire roadway reconstructed. So we're also including this as part of our some of the monies that we received from the road bond. So we're going to be doing essentially this whole entire roadway over because it is in need of it, and that will also correct a lot of the flooding issues as well. So the 400.
It's a substantially more than $400,000 project.
I wouldn't say substantially more. I mean, we have to pave the street at some point.
That's fine. No, I'm in favor of that, but
yeah. So we're calling.
It just sounds like not enough money for all that.
Not for the entire thing, no. But that was the max that the grant would give us. So we maxed out the grant that was available.
And I'd also follow up on Roseanne's comments that benches, you might want to look at what type of business and where the bump outs are, and maybe tailor some of the bump outs to some of the long established businesses. You know, we've been in this spot since 1986, so I get a good feel for the turnover here. But some of the businesses are going to be here for a while, and if you look at how some of the buildings are used and tailor some of the bump outs to those type uses, you might, settle the street and in the neighborhood better into, the community.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Thank you. Yes. Some of the remainder of the presentation, we do kind of go into that, and we will get into the individual bump outs themselves and kind of looking at it looks like today and with the businesses that are there. So that is coming up.
Great. Yeah, so we'll spend a few more minutes just talking about the differences between these options, as Bill just mentioned. Then we'll start to march down the corridor and have that same conversation about, are there any differences about the nuances about the businesses and so forth along Albion Street. So let's go to a couple more folks here. Let's go to Jonathan, if you'd like to join the conversation.
Sure, thank you very much. This is Jonathan Chimes, Hopkins Street resident and member of the Town Council. I just wanted to piggyback off of one of the questions in the chat from Anne-Marie around sort of the arts corridor. So, as we look at Albion Street, we've got the Albion Cultural Exchange, kind of anchoring one side of that. And we do have actually a number of businesses on Albion Street that are focused on the arts. And I wanted to suggest that maybe as part of the design element, if we could think about sort of a public art component to some of the bumps outs, or some area where we can look at display space or something else that kind of ties to the arts as part of the draw for this area. I think that would really reinforce a lot of what we tried to promote with ACE and some of the other businesses on Albion Street. I think it would also add some just creativity and interest to some of the components that we're seeing here.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate the comment. Let's go to Julie next, if you'd like to join the conversation, Julie.
Sure. Hi, Julie Smith-Galvin, 20 Grafton Street and Vice Chair of the Town Council. I just wanted to follow up on the question from John on bike lanes. I know you said that it seems too narrow. I'm wondering, is there a threshold? I mean, is that a state decision, or is that just your opinion at this point?
Well, I mean, you have requirements that you need to typically, we have design standards that we use with everything we're doing, obviously. And in this case, I mean, typically you're trying to have 5+ feet for a bike lane to be dedicated, and then to make sure that it stays separated and whatnot. We just essentially don't have really enough space to make that happen in this corridor.
Was that Wakefield standard, or is that kind of, I mean, there's no way to do it? Because here's what I'm thinking, and I don't need an answer on it right now. I mean, this is complete street funding, which really the purpose is to connect public transportation with kind of more generalized individual transportation. And it seems to me that Albion Street is really the connector between Main Street and, in fact, kind of driving people down from the Salem Street area and the Greenwood area into that train station. And so it seems to me like we really should think about a bike lane there, and probably as part of that as well, very much limiting the speed limit so that it's safe for pedestrians, bikers, and cars. So I would really like to see something put into that.
Yeah, well, I can take another look at it. Definitely take another look at it. We did look at it to see if it was possible when we were going after the grant, because that would obviously put us in a higher threshold depending if we had a dedicated bike lane. So when I looked at it, it didn't seem feasible to me, but I'm happy to. I
think it's worth a second look, because I really think that there's going to be a push for bike lanes kind of throughout the town. And I think that ignoring Albion Street is kind of the connector to the rest of town. It should be something we look at seriously.
Of course.
Thank you.
Trish and Jeffrey, I know that we had talked about when we were looking at this, because we looked at different options on Albion Street some time ago, and I believe, Trish, you had fleshed that out, and it was determined that we weren't able to, we even looked at even widening the sidewalks potentially, and we couldn't even do that because we need the clearance for the emergency vehicle. So I believe that unless we were to eliminate parking on one side, which was generally not accepted as an option, I don't think that we had the width, if I'm not
That's
mistaken.
right. So you have very valid points, bike accommodations and making sure that everything's cycling is important on each of the roadways and everything is connected. The issue with Albion Street is there's parking on both sides of the roadway, and everyone knows how important parking is in a downtown area. We were trying to minimize the amount of impact to the parking, plus enhance the roadway itself. The sidewalks are really narrow. One of the options that you do have for bike accommodation, and it is a state and federal standard, it's not just a Wakefield standard, and we have to meet standards in order to be eligible for the funding that you secured for complete streets. The sidewalks on Albion Street are fairly narrow. One of the options that we could have considered, which we have considered as the concepts for Main Street, is to make one of the sidewalks 10 feet wide. And that would accommodate bikes as well as pedestrians. The issue is then you would have to eliminate parking. So there's a balance between, you know, do you have a bike lane on Albion Street, allow for a wide enough roadway for emergency vehicles to navigate through if there's a stalled out car, someone's in the bike lane, and there's parking alongside of it. You know, it's really constrained, and safety is really the primary concern here. So there was really no option to have a bike lane on Albion Street. Share the road's a little bit different. And the other thing that we were considering is an alternate route instead of Albion Street, you know, one of the side streets that are next to Albion as a bike route to get from North Ave to Main Street. So that was one of the things that we did look at as we were evaluating the transportation in the entire downtown area.
Great. So let's get a couple more people on a mic here, and then maybe we'll go back to the chat function as well. So Jeff, if you'd like to join the conversation.
Sure. This is actually David Knutson. I'm a downtown resident, and I would certainly like to second or third what's been said about the greenery along the street. But I think along with considering that, it's certainly worth, I also like the comments about whether benches were actually necessary given the business use or the use of the street. I think there is an argument to be made along those lines for at least a couple areas. I mean, a couple out of the set of bump outs should have some bike racks on them, because it's certainly a problem in the downtown area if you are forced to try and lock your bike up to a light pole that's too large for your cable to go around. I've been faced with that circumstance a lot of times. And I think without talking about every single bump out having the same assortment of amenities, there are probably a few places along Albion where it makes sense to have at least one rack.
Great. Thank you for that feedback. I appreciate it. And Chris, let's go back to you if you'd like to join the conversation, and then we'll go back to a couple of folks that have chatted some questions.
Given that there's 400 residential units that are going to be just on the other side of this North Ave intersection, is there a way, you know, I mean, Albion Street's in essence going to be the gateway to downtown for, you know, 400 new residents.
Mm-hmm.
That intersection, I think, needs a lot of attention and needs to be very inviting to downtown. Thoughts on that one?
We agree with you, and we got a developer contribution as part of that development at Harvard Mills. So it is in the queue. Once we go to do and reconstruct that section in that area, we would be looking to change up the Gould Street and Albion Street intersection. And we have a draft sketch plan at this point, but not part of this project yet.
Okay. So is that something that will happen before this project, after this project, during it?
The second phase you're talking about?
Well, no, the residential tie-in to Albion Street from Foundry and Lake area.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work that's going on down there, as you know. So, I mean, they're pushed out. That construction will be going on for the better half of a year and a half plus. So there's a lot of enhancements that are going to happen and that are part of developer contribution. So they're doing sidewalk on Foundry work. They're also like I said, they also donated provided us a developer contribution for us to redesign the Gould Street intersection. So we will get to that once that project's all complete. We wouldn't want to start before you know, that project's done.
So that ties into, when do you think this project would start?
This project?
And what's the disruption to Albion Street businesses?
So we would look to start to bid this. If we get consensus tonight on what we want the materials to be, we're going to finalize the design and bid it, and hopefully start construction in the fall. That would be our goal.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I think just on that too, Bill, it's important to remind folks that those who had taken part in prior Envision sessions, we've had a lot of drawings relative to that intersection. We're talking Gould Street, where it intersects with Albion, right around where the 7-Eleven is. So if people want to go into the town's website and click on the Envision link, you can see a lot of the schematics relative to that. So that's always been in the mix. To answer your question too, Chris, it's just a matter of the timing with that, as Bill points out.
Great. So I'm going to just take a break here. I see Dan, I see you're going on and off mute, and I just want to make sure that if you're trying to join the conversation and not able to raise your hand. So Dan Benjamin, just in case and if the answer is no, that's okay, but I just want to make sure that you're not trying to wave us down to get a comment in.
Yes, I'm trying to get a comment.
Yeah, so I was wondering if you couldn't find that raise your hand feature in Zoom. So yeah, once you join the conversation. Go ahead, Dan, you can continue.
Okay, I live at 10 Foster Street, which is a condominium. Foster Street is a one-way, Richardson Ave is a one-way, Albion is a one-way. I look at the bump out, which I like, but could that possibly be moved a little bit further down Albion Street? Because right now, any large truck, tractor trailer, trying to go down Foster Street onto Albion Street, hits a bottleneck right there, very narrow. And right now, I think there's a handicap space at the end of where the item is. And across the street, if there's a car park, at the same time, very difficult to make that turn. But I like the bump out if it could be moved down further.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at the location. We don't want to move it down too much because of the drainage. That was part of the reason we picked that location. Then also, you know, being at an intersection on the roadway, it makes sense to have it. What we can do is we'll look at the turning radius as you're turning onto Albion to make sure that the trucks will be able to make that maneuver. But I appreciate the feedback. That I'll definitely take a look at
and
the radius.
also, I believe, and maybe Bill Renault can say something about it, but I know when they were digging up in front of the item office, there's a lot of cobblestone still left there. And I think material could possibly be used either in one of these bump outs or in the crosswalks going across. But look into, there's still cobblestone there from the old when there was a rail going down.
Yeah, so we set up our contract so that we retain that cobblestone. So we'll definitely take a look at that too.
Excellent. Great. Thank you for that comment, Dan. So let's go to a few that are from the chat function. I'm not sure our team would like to respond to some of those. And let's try to maybe take 4 or 5 of these. And then what we're going to go is move on in our agenda to looking at some of the specific locations on Albion Street. So I'm not sure if anyone wanted to dive into some of those questions and comments as well between Bill, Trish, Ed.
Let's see. Question on an accessible ADA entrance to the Albion Cultural Exchange. What we would look to do is to, assist to make sure that, so we would grade that area to make sure that we would enhance the ADA access to it. But we wouldn't be doing the actual access to the building itself. That would be part of a separate project, but we would, obviously anything we do will marry into ADA access to that building. After consideration of the comments regarding the businesses, it wouldn't make sense to sit in front of any of them. I think that's just a comment.
The next one's here about the street lights being, the height of them being lowered. Where you are with the lights, Bill, in general?
Right. So what we're doing is we're actually in conversations with the municipal light plant to look at replacement of the lights out there. One of the main things about that is that they have underground conduit that's antiquated, that's out there. So they are planning to install new conduits in this whole stretch prior to our project. And then we'll be working with them to evaluate new lights for that area. They may remove them. They may be actually using the same poles and just lowering them. So there's a couple of options that we're evaluating, and that's ongoing. Realistically, what we're going to do is plan for that to happen as probably a separate year. I don't think it'll be fleshed out at the same time that we construct this, but we're basically going to design around it so that they can just be implemented. So that is, we're just including it as part of our design.
Great. I think there was a comment here about looking down on Cape Cod about some of the bike racks that they got down there and the bigger ones as well. That was great to see. Some folks here echoing about option 3 in here. There's a question about the length of the project and the disruption potentially. I think we answered the question about some of the time frame as well. I think maybe, Bill, can you talk about ADA accessibility and entrances into businesses as you go up and down Albion Street? Like, what's the general protocol on how you deal with that?
So as part of the survey, what we do is we look at all the thresholds to make sure that we can, if we can make the ADA access as part of the project, we do it. But if there's a step or something that doesn't allow us to do it on the private property, that's when we don't. So, everything we're doing, we're designing for ADA accessibility to the extent that we can within the roadway. Again, we have a very tight sidewalk, so we have limited potential as to what we can do. But if there's a way to make it work, we are going to do that.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Unless I've missed something, maybe we should move on from the chat function. Anyone else see something that was critical to mention at this point?
Two things. One thing was, what's the width of the roadway from parking stall to parking stall? And it varies from 16 feet to 18 feet, which is the minimum width for a one-way roadway, similar to Albion Street. And then there was another one here. In terms of the street lights and the height, I know it looks really out of scale. Street lights are a very funny thing. They're either used to provide safety and lighting of the roadway itself, or for pedestrian scale, which is smaller, and for sidewalk areas. The lights that are out on Albion Street and Main Street are to light the roadways also. So it's really a safety issue with the height of the lights. If you have a shorter light, you have to have more of them along the way. So that's something else that Bill will need to consider as he works with the light department to fix the lights out on Albion Street. And then there was one other one. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought there were two. There was just that one.
Okay, well, we can continue to monitor the chat. If you need to take a step back, that's fine too. So,
Jeffrey, I think we should also mention too, I know there are a number of Albion Street business owners on here, and the town will be meeting as this project advances along. We'll be meeting with business owners to give more details about the timeline and any disruptions and any modifications that will need to be made. So rest assured that the town will be reaching out and be in regular communication with the business owners on Albion, so that their businesses are impacted as minimally as possible, and you'll certainly be apprised of everything in advance so you can plan accordingly.
That's great. Thank you for that great update as well. So I think what we're going to do now is, with the idea that we've gotten familiar with options 1, 2, and 3 and had a pretty good conversation about that, I think people quickly realize that maybe it doesn't apply to the same way in all these different locations. We're going to focus in on these 4 areas that I mentioned earlier in the presentation, intentionally pausing as we go through these. But maybe what we can do first, Bill, if you want to tag team with me here, we can just go through what are the 4 areas, get people familiar with them, and then we'll go back to area 1 and just spend maybe 5 minutes just talking about what are the critical things in these areas as well. So let's go on to area number 1. So here we are down by North Ave. Bill, do you want to describe like what the nature of the design is in this area, what the intent is here?
Sure. So the intent here really is just to look at shortening the crosswalk to go over towards the train station. So our intent really is just to provide a little bit more area in that, to slow the traffic as it comes around, from taking that right from from Albion Street, and then also just enhancing the ADA accessibility in that area as well.
Yeah, so here we have one of the 4 quadrants of this intersection with an expanded curb extension here that reduces the length of that crosswalk, and as Bill just mentioned as well. So some enhancements in that corner. And just a reminder, as we go across the tracks, Bill had already mentioned that there's another phase that would be happening a little bit later. So let's go on to, and then just in terms of the picture here, so we're looking going down North Ave here. So that bump out would really be in this corner of the intersection as well.
Yeah, basically right at the documents. Yep.
Right, so let's go on to area number 2. Bill, do you want to describe what's happening here?
Sure, yeah, this is just really a standard bump out. So in the initial design that VHB developed, in their conceptual design, they looked at, I believe it was close to 6 bump outs, Jeffrey, is that correct? 5 or 6, correct. 5 or 6, yeah. So as we looked through it, one of the things that we evaluated was one, drainage being one of the big ones. Because obviously as you put these bump outs in, it has a potential to stop the stormwater from flowing down the street. So in some of these areas, we have to extend the drainage up. So we didn't want to do a bunch of them through the whole entire run. So we identified this was one of the ones that was included. And really the intent here is just to have a shorter crosswalk and allow allow pedestrian enhancements and ADA accessibility across the roadway.
And while today there's not a crosswalk here, what this will be doing is have these ramps that would come down. You'd be able to come across Albion Street here. And just in terms of approximately where this would be, where the van is parked out here, there'd be a little bit of a bump out on this side here, and then a little bit of bump out on the right-hand side as you're coming down Albion Street. Let's go on to the third spot. So we're about mid-block. This is the one that we actually just talked about here as well. That was the case study that we showed all these different options. And I think here, this is one of the bigger ones out of the 4 that we have, which really affords us the ability to do very different things. So as we're looking through these, realize that some of the length of these bump outs change in terms of the location. Anything specific about this one, Bill, that you want to mention?
Yeah, I mean, I think aside from the fact that, having the 3 locations will also show a lot of, it'll include a lot of traffic calming. So in theory, the idea of necking down the roadway and having a little bit less pavement, the idea in changing up the view, you get some, slowing down of traffic as well. So that's kind of what these do as well. So it's not just the ADA accessibility, although that's a big piece, and providing areas to, if we choose to, add a bench, which doesn't seem to be necessarily a popular a point, or enhance and add trees, and it gives us an ability to do these types of things. So that's really the idea behind these designs.
Great, thank you. And on to the last stop here, as we're getting closer to Main Street here, you can see we've introduced another crosswalk that would get to both sides of Albion Street here as well. So this one's a little bit smaller out of the 3 or 4 that we have here as well, but important area to be able to neck down quickly, again, for maybe some of the traffic calming as well as the pedestrian access on both sides. Is there anything unique about this area, Bill?
No, I think this one's a little bit smaller, so that we were looking at the parking spaces that were there so that we're not losing as many. So that was the one of the other intents as we went through this. We looked to minimize the amount of parking spaces that would be lost. So, and then, obviously we'll be taking a look at the turning radius here coming off of Foster, so, as requested. So.
Fantastic. So with that, let's go back up to area number 1 and open up again for both some chat as well as some people joining on audio here. Anything specific about this and about this location down by the train tracks and that little bump out of the corner? Any further feedback? So let's go to Roseanne. Let's join the conversation again.
Hi again. So I'm kind of an expert on number 1 and number 2 because I look at it like all day long. I just wanted to point out that there is 3 lanes of traffic that are actually at that intersection. So there's a lane that goes to the right, there's a lane that goes straight, and there's a lane that goes to the left. I believe if you have that bump out on number 2, you'll kind of create like a real jam. So a lot of cars kind of get jammed there anyways with those 3 lanes, but that could be a real issue for traffic. And also, I guess I just question why we need a crosswalk there when it's really a short distance, just a few yards to go to, to the North Ave corner. So I just wanted to point that out. I'm not too sure if functionality makes sense there. So I just wanted to point that out.
Just to clarify your question, why do we need one in area 2 or why do we need one in area 1?
No, I love area 1. In fact, I really think that's important because of all the middle school children that go to school, and it's a really, really busy intersection. Number 2, there are 3 lanes at the end of that Albion section, 3 lanes. So there's a lane that goes right, there's a lane that goes in the middle, and then there's a lane that goes to the left. Right now, we have cars kind of jamming just to get into those 3 lanes. If you put those bumpers in, you're going to really create a lot of havoc for traffic. So I don't know if that traffic pattern has been studied or not. And then I'm also just bringing up the point that it's a stone's throw. Like, I'm a terrible baseball player. I could never throw a ball very far, but I could throw a ball from number 2 to number 1 really easily. It's really, really close. So I guess I just question why we need a crosswalk right there.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Bill, I'm not sure if you have any reaction to that as well. I think part of it might be from a design aesthetic point of view. There's probably limited areas where you can have these opportunities to do something to affect change and to have some more breathing room for the pedestrian experience. So it might be a little bit about it as well, but also to your point, how close are these crosswalks given the functionality of it too? So I'm not sure, Bill, if you want to react to any of that as well, but.
No, I actually, that's the same point I would have made. I mean, we are limited on where we can actually put these things. So that was one of the intents. As for the traffic piece, I believe there's parking spaces there today. So the intent was that, you wouldn't really see any additional queuing from the traffic that would be an issue. It would be the same as it is today because there would be a car park there.
No, so. But that's not, I could disagree with you based on just my experience of hanging out there like all the time. There's a flow. The cars, there's not always a car there, right? So there's a flow. But even this morning, I almost got hit by a woman who was trying to like take me out because she was trying to get to one of those lanes. So I think that it's worth studying the traffic flow and how people actually utilize that corner. I just don't know if it's necessary to have a bump out when cars are used to flowing, and to flow the traffic, really important to get that traffic moving and not have, so in the morning, for example, if you wanted to study the traffic on, not so much now, but in the old days when there was actually people going to work, there's a lot of traffic on Albion Street in the morning. So it's just something to bring awareness to of how we actually utilize that street in traffic.
Excellent. Thank you for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Let's go to Chris next. Do you want to join the conversation, Chris? Chris, you're still on mute. If you'd like to go off mute there, would be great.
That right turn lane at the base of Albion Street, you really do need 3 lanes at the end of the street. There's so much traffic that stacks up at different hours of the day. And if that's only 2 lanes and you can't get out, it's going to bump Albion Street all the way back to Maine. You see it every day. So does Roseanne. You need to keep that 3 lanes.
Yeah, we're not changing that as part of this design. The bump out it's into North Ave. So right now it's essentially where the crosswalk is, going across in front of Dunkin' Donuts.
Okay.
And just for convenience, I tried to zoom into the
Yeah, no, I got
slide
it. Thank
here,
you.
so we can see those. I guess it's the question of how far back that goes, but just so people can see those 3 different arrows, just for clarity.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for that, Chris. I think, Dan, did I see you have your hand up here as well, if you'd like to join the conversation?
I agree with Chris on that corner there. Matter of fact, about 50 feet up on Albion Street is a MBTA stop. And then that bus has to come around that corner and turn. Also, where you have some of these bump outs, will we be losing a parking space in front of Dunkin' Donuts, which also just above it has a handicap space?
No, we wouldn't be losing a parking space. There's 2 right now. And so essentially we're bumping out at the crosswalk that's there.
And also all the, at the intersection itself, will that be all new smart lighting and fixtures put in there?
That will be done as part of the Main Street project, not as part of this project.
Okay. And I noticed, as a frequent patron of Dunkin' Donuts, at night, and at night, you look across by the commuter rail station, it's extremely dark. I had talked to Councilor Chimes one day about it. They had 6 lights that were out. Okay. And also right at this intersection, for years, they had a spotlight right on it at night. I don't know who owns that light, if it's the MBTA or the town, but maybe that should be activated so it floods that whole intersection. Because at night, when those trains come in, there's a lot of people that are coming off those trains.
Okay. You can take a look into the lighting there, sure.
Excellent. Okay, let's move up to bump out area number 2. And I know we started a little bit of the conversation as it ties into those 3 lanes and some of the backup that we talked about as well. But I would also maybe just offer here quickly that this is one of the ones that's maybe mid-sized out of the size of the 4 that we're going to look at today as well, and what that might do in terms of some of that pedestrian experience. So let's throw out some comments about here as well. Anyone want to join the conversation? And I guess we could also just be monitoring some of the chat as well. So I think if Trish or Bill or Ed want to look at those real quickly in case there's things we want to point out there as well, that would be great.
The question was if the crosswalk was raised. The crosswalks are raised.
Raised.
No, we didn't design them to be raised crosswalks.
Yeah. And Ed, did I think you have something too?
Right, Bill, just to your point too, when we're talking about these bump outs, when we're looking at existing conditions, we're looking at for the most part, parking spaces that exist currently. And so in terms of the impact on the drivability of this road, as Bill had said, envision there being a car parked in these spaces right now. And that in essence, it would be replaced with the bump outs in these certain locations. So I know that you were very keenly tuned into that, Bill, when you were citing these bump outs.
Very much so.
Great. Do we have anything more in the chat as well? Okay, any comments on area number 2? I know we talked about that a little bit. I'm not seeing any hands raised virtually here as well, and that's okay. So let's go on to area number 3. Again, this is where we kind of showed our case study here, but one of the bigger ones here in terms of some of the functionality and ability for aesthetics. And I know we had a lot of good comments about options 1, 2, and 3 before. But any additional comments here that might be about programming or functionality, now that you've seen all four, that might have changed or informed some of your thinking on this area? Okay, let's go on to 4 then. So again, we're getting closer towards Main Street here. Again, this is one of the smaller ones as well. Bill, maybe you could do a quick recap about some of the function here on area number 4. Might be helpful for folks.
Yes, kind of the same idea, you know, trying to, this is basically the first one on the roadway. So kind of similar to 2, we're trying to get it. So as you're getting into the roadway, you can see, you know, the necking down and providing some of the traffic calming in that area. And then also obviously with the intersection of Foster's coming in, you know, just to allow, you know, better pedestrian mobility through that section.
Great. Thank you for that. And feel free to raise your hand at any point in time. Maybe we'll go back to some of the chat function here. Do we miss anything on the chat function? I think we're actually pretty caught up on those as well, unless I've missed something from the rest of our team. Dan?
One was lights do come loose and need to be tightened from time to time, but the lights are going to be replaced regardless, right, Bill?
Yeah, we're working with it. Just the timing of when that happens. We just really can't make it happen with this project, but the provisions for it. So the infrastructure will be in place. We may have, you know, a panel that might have to be removed in the future, or a small section of it, but that's about it.
Great.
Okay, and then the other one is losing 4 spots. There at number 2 is very hard hit for businesses located there. There are also resident parking. When we did the traffic study, so we evaluated parking throughout the downtown area, including Albion Street. One of the things that we looked at were turnover rates for the cars that were parked on all of the roadways. And the interesting part about Albion Street, and I don't dispute that parking is very important for businesses, but a lot of the parking spaces that were on Albion Street were being occupied for over 4 and 8 hours, which translates into commuter rail parking. One of the things that we did talk about as part of the presentation was, you know, we're trying to maximize as much parking as possible, especially for residential. I don't dispute that, but some of the commuter rail parking had been addressed with the time restricted parking mandates in the downtown area. So that was a success to try to have a better turnover rate for parking.
Right, and again, just to one of the comments I made early on, just to reiterate that, is that we're in the process now of looking at public-private partnerships to try to recoup those spaces that would be lost. So we would have a net of no lost spaces, and then hopefully actually an increase in spaces potentially. But those dialogues are ongoing as we speak.
I think I know we've had this conversation as well about, you know, location and parking and replacement and strategy. I think we also heard during the process how important it was to do a few modest things on Albion Street to try to bring it to life in terms of the pedestrian experience, the arts, being able to pause too. So I get that there's this balance in there. So I think what was interesting in both our work and Bill's work is that there's only limited spots where you can do this given all of the demands on functionality along the length of Albion. So these are some real trade-offs that I think we just need to talk about, you know, and what's the community preference here. So all good feedback, very good feedback. So I am not seeing any more on the Q&A. I think we covered all of those as well. Dan, I think I might have seen your hand go up again just in case. So let me just offer that one more time. Were you trying to chime in there, Dan?
Do you happen to know how many handicap parking spaces are on Albion Street?
Today, I don't off the top of my head, Dan.
Okay, would we lose any at all?
I'm going to evaluate it to look at the number that's needed for the roadway, and we'll maintain the number that's required by the ADA standard. So that's what we would do.
Okay.
I can go. We can.
I would like to see at least as many as they have today, tomorrow.
Yeah. I think there's 1 or 2. I think there's 2, right? If I recall, but I could be wrong on that. So
there's 1 by the item. I know 2 down by the old Queens Vault area.
Okay, so there's a total of 3, but I'd take a look at the total number of spaces, and then whichever one's the total number that we would need for this stretch, I would design it to have at that end.
Okay.
Great, thanks for that comment. So I think with that, unless we missed anything before we go on, we're going to wrap up on Albion Street and just do a quick little recap on some of the things we talked about on Main Street. Is there anything else that anyone else would like to offer before we move on?
Jeffrey, I just wanted to just remind folks that since parking enforcement went into place, the town has been monitoring Albion Street, and we have seen a tremendous improvement in terms of availability of parking and turnover of parking as a result of that. And so I think we can be quite confident that maintaining the same level, or as Bill had said, ideally increasing the number, will put us in the right zone, not just for the businesses currently, but any future businesses that may come in with parking needs.
Great. Thank you for that, Ed. Very helpful. Okay, Ted, I see you raised your hand here if you'd like to join the conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, a very productive meeting. I love the trees as well, although a lot of our buildings are charming. Collectively, it can be a bit unsightly, and the trees will really help break it up a little. And everything's good. The benches I'm not crazy about either for a variety of reasons, but we're missing an opportunity if we don't address the bike lane a little more seriously, because it's the future. And you're going to be addressing it on Main Street, and it'll connect to the bike trail. And inevitably, people are going to flow onto Albion Street one way or another to find the way out of town, heading towards Stoneham. I just think we're missing a big opportunity here. Anything you could consider, taking a parking lane and moving it out a little so there's a bike lane between the sidewalk and the cars on one side possibly. And I know you have the bumpers to consider, but please give us some more thought. The bike lane's really, really going to be important in the future.
Great.
And otherwise, it's really wonderful. I'm really excited about this. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ted. Appreciate it. Excellent. Okay, then let's move forward with the agenda here. So what we're going to do now is just spend a few minutes on Main Street. And I think, as Ed and Bill and others might have mentioned, you're really kind of seeing a sneak peek into what's coming forward in terms of where we are with the design process. This is really behind where Albion Street is today in terms of being ready to go out and be constructed, as a reminder there. But it shows really the importance of thinking about the streetscape and the aesthetics and the character as one entire, almost like package or different set of materials, so you can really bring the whole downtown together. That said, we've worked with many communities where there's variations on a theme. So what you do on Albion Street can kind of be different than Main Street, as long as there's some connectivity between the two as well. So I guess we just pause here maybe for 5 minutes just to get a little bit of preliminary feedback, in terms of showing the flexibility that can happen on these bump outs, and see what people start to like or dislike about these options, because there's plenty of time ahead of us to make some refinements in these areas. But are you liking what you see? Are there certain things that you thought that might be happening in some of these bump outs that, as the design team starts to think about this, we can use this time to really continue to refine what's happening in these areas as well? So we put all of those 6 different sub options in this area. They're not intentionally tied to a specific location. That was not the intent, but the more we can hear about what you like and don't like in these areas, I think will be helpful for everybody. So would anyone like to join the conversation and talk a little bit about Main Street for a few minutes? So let's go to Jonathan, if you'd like to join the conversation.
Yes, thank you very much. As we think about Main Street, what's interesting is we've got sort of a pretty expansive area to play with. And so, I could see really some element of each of these options sort of being part of the design, and could see sort of some variety in terms of what we do. I do want to say, one of the things I think that we've seen, as businesses have reopened and restaurants have reopened post-COVID, is that we're seeing people use outdoor space in some new ways that I don't think we had seen before. Obviously in terms of outdoor dining, but even some of the stores, bringing out some sort of retail to the sidewalk. And so I do like the idea of having the ability to have some flexible space built in. I think we've seen sort of in a real life example that creates some vibrancy and some interest in downtown that, I hope we're able to preserve and promote, as we go through the redesign process.
Excellent. Yeah, we've seen in a lot of different streets this idea that it's a living, breathing thing, that over time, having repurposing and experimenting with what works, what doesn't work. So the idea of working with the businesses should be a really important part of it as well. So very good observation. Anyone else like to join in on that as well? And I'm not sure if we have a couple more folks that have chatted. A couple of things I think have come in as well. Okay, so I see someone that likes the pop-up option here as well. Again, the flexibility is kind of interesting in terms of placemaking and activities as well. So I think just with that, recognize that, again, you're really seeing a little bit of a sneak peek, as I mentioned here, that this will be continue to be refined. But I think we're really excited, recognizing that you don't have much of this in the downtown area in terms of this look or this feel. So knowing that this might be another one of these things that really help bring a lot of energy and positivity and design and character to downtown, building upon what's there today. I think we're all kind of excited about those opportunities as well. So with that, I think, Bill, let me just ask if there are any closing comments from your end. Did we get some of the feedback that I think you're hoping to get tonight in terms of direction for you and your team?
Yeah, definitely hearing loud and clear that we want to get some green space and some trees down there. So that is definitely going to happen. The only other piece that would be interesting is just on any of the hardscape. If we're doing the softscape in these bump outs, do we want some brick in these areas at all? Or are we just going to really go more, more softscape? That's, everyone's saying between 2 and 3. Do we want to kind of have a hybrid of between 2 and 3? So we have some hardscape and some trees. That would just be the only question I would have.
Right. And I think given the size of some of these bump outs too, I think we've learned that it might be hard to fit everything in some of the smaller ones. So maybe there you're kind of forced a little bit more towards the hardscape. But I think that'd be good to get some feedback. What do folks think about the hardscape versus softscape? Any further feedback? Someone's writing in here a blend.
Blend.
Yeah. So I think my sense is maybe folks are also realizing that there's probably some limited options of what you can do in some of these areas once you start to dig into those details. I think, Sarah, did you want to join the conversation and jump in about some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think having brick accents would really benefit the downtown, because we don't really have a history of full brick sidewalks to tie into as other towns and some cityscapes have. But we definitely have like the crosswalks that have that, I think it's a impressed brick concrete or something like that. And we have brick buildings all over. So having some kind of brick element to tie in and create like a thematic color unity with the rest of downtown would be nice, but not necessarily the full brick laid sidewalk, since we don't have that anywhere else really.
We wouldn't be able to do the full brick with the monies that we have, so it would be accents. And I really figured that we would focus the accents at these bump outs. That's what I was envisioning. So,
right.
Yeah.
So let me help clarify that, because that's a good point there. What you're seeing here would look similar to some of the illustrations you're seeing on the bottom, in that there would be brick as well as concrete. In the area that we're looking at here where the brick is, that's really just where the bump out is. There's about 5 or 6 feet, I'd imagine, Bill, behind that where these people are standing in the air, that would be concrete. Right, yeah. So the majority would be concrete and just an accent just at the bump out locations. Just to try to help clarify that as well.
Yeah, thank you.
A great question, great comment. Any other feedback on this? Dan, would you like to join in again?
We talked sustainability, and can we use some of the leftover, like I said, cobblestone, and maybe some of the granite curbing that will probably be left over after this project, and use it for the streetscape, making benches, gardens, benches on top of these pump outs? Could we possibly use some older material and save on cost?
We can, depending on the condition of the granite curbing, yes, we can use that for sure. The cobbles, it's difficult because we don't know the condition of it without digging it up and seeing. So for me to plan that out as part of this contract would be difficult. We may have to use it in a different location in the future.
Because I look at some of these bump outs, it looks like they're going to be poured concrete.
The bump outs themselves will be they're going to have brick accent to it, and then they can have some concrete to it. But
which in the time I think would be kind of difficult in Wakefield as far as plowing.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I think it would be difficult to plow around those bump outs in the wintertime, whether you'd be chipping the poured concrete, where today we have granite. You don't have to worry about that.
Oh, no, we're doing it's going to be granite curbing throughout. The question is whether I'm going to reuse it or if it's going to be new, depending on the condition. We do that as an assessment before we bid it.
Right. Great. So I think that's it in terms of, we had a couple comments about brick and some of the blend between 2 and 3.
Great.
This is very helpful to us as well. So I think with that, I'm going to go to the end of the slide here and just have the opportunity to say thank you to all of us. And Ed, I'm not sure if you want to help close us out for the evening or any other comments that we might have missed for this evening, Ed?
Sure. Well, first off, I wanted to first thank you, Jeffrey Morris and Logan, as well as Trish Domigan for VHB. And we are also joined by Josh Treachus as well, who's working on the project. So thank you all for all the hard work you've done. Thank you, Bill Renaud. I know you've been working on this for a very long time, and you've done some incredibly impressive work here. So thank you for all the work you've done, and Director Conway as well for all of your supports with this, especially with the public-private partnership. Hopefully more to come on that soon. Just to remind folks, Albion Street currently, you take a look tomorrow in the daylight, it has no crosswalks. There's a crosswalk when Albion hits Main, a crosswalk when Albion hits North Ave. So this is going to be a tremendous improvement, not just aesthetically, but also from a safety perspective. And as Bill and Trish had alluded to, this does provide traffic calming in a way that we don't currently have. And I think that will also help businesses because people will not just see it as a pass-through street, but instead an opportunity to actually drive down and take in, what the environment. So that'll be really significant improvement, I think, for our business community as well. And this was also done with a design towards a business eye, what we could do to help try to improve the customer experience for our businesses. So it's Albion is, this stretch of it especially is very business centric, and we're mindful of that, preserving parking and trying to enhance the aesthetics. So I think Bill and VHB team have done a tremendous job to get us to this point. Thank you everyone for participating tonight and offering your feedback. I think the takeaways were the greening of the area is important. The drainage opportunities we have are important. And it sounds like a blending of options 2 and 3 with incorporating in the brick component as best we can seem to be some of the takeaways that I've gotten from the feedback we have here. Please remember, this is an open dialogue. We'll continue to have opportunities. You can go into our town's website and click on the Envision Wakefield icon on the main page, and you can offer comments, further comments. You can also reach out to Bill Renaud directly at DPW anytime, or any of us on the town council certainly, or Town Administrator Mayo as well, who's been very instrumental in this project. We thank you, Mr. Mayo, for that as well. So with that, if there's nothing further, the next step will be for the town to put this out to bid. We'll have some even more defined schematics at that point. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be meeting with the business owners on this street to make sure that we have a very clear plan for them, so that we can minimize disruption, get any further feedback, and provide a very solid timeline to them, so that they can plan accordingly based upon that. But I think this is a really exciting opportunity. I'm hoping everyone will see this as a great template for what's to come with the broader Envision project across the downtown from the lake all the way to the junction. But with that, if there are no further questions or comments, I thank everyone for participating this evening. Again, special thanks to our DPW and VHB for bringing us all together tonight. So with that, if anyone else has any further comments, otherwise, I think we'll wrap up with that.
Great.
So again, thank you everyone for joining. We appreciate it, and good night, and be well, Wakefield. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.